Good afternoon and welcome to St James's Church, Piccadilly, as we gather to celebrate the life of Ian Player, whose work did immeasurable good for our planet and society, and whose life touched so many gathered here today. Would you please be seated as we say the opening psalm? Bless the Lord, O my soul. O my Lord, my God, you are very great. You are clothed with honour and majesty, wrapped in light as with a garment. You stretch out the heavens like a tent. You set the beams of your chambers on the water. You make the clouds your chariot. You ride on the wings of the wind. You make the winds your messengers, fire and flame your ministers. You set the earth on its foundations so that it shall never be shaken. You cover it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they flee. At the sound of your thunder they take flight. They rose up to the mountains, ran down to the valleys, to the place that you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you've made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Yonder is the sea, great and wide. Creeping things innumerable are there. Living things, both small and great. There go the ships, and Leviathan that you formed to sport in it. These all look to you, to give them their food in due season. When you give to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled with good things. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works, who looks on the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have my being. And so we stand to sing our first hymn, one chosen by Ian Player, Onward Christian Soldiers.
First welcome to His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales's representative, who just happens to be Mr. Andrew Sheepshanks, who's done so much in this place, including introducing the magical Woodford Dresser jar. Welcome to Listener Vicky. Wonderful honour to have you with us. Welcome to His Excellency, the High Commissioner for South Africa, His Excellency Mr. Obed Mlawa. Great honour, sir. So many people have done so much to welcome everyone else from your romantic, distant places. Welcome everyone to England, from romantic Great Britain, and all who've done for this amazing service, particularly the astonishing Jo, who should be here, but she tended to go, so I jumped. Oscar Wilde said, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars." I think we've got quite a lot of stargazers in the church here. But the combined strength of that extraordinary Sir Lawrence, the magical and amazing Sir Wilfrid Thesiger, two fantastic heroes of the last century, and the great Ian Blair, and indeed our recent late patron-in-chief, Duke of Wellington, a general highly decorated in the last war, military cross. And all those strengths combine to make us see those widening stars of wilderness, I think, more steadfastly and clearly. Ian's pilgrimage was and is to inspire the world to love and protect our most precious and precarious wilderness. I think that is the Olympic torch we carry, honouring the ideals of Ian and his magical friends. So, welcome indeed to the memorial service for a great man who is looking down at us right now, cheering us on to the actions he inspired. Welcome all indeed.
We are here today gathered on behalf of a very honorable man who did a wonderful job for conservation, protecting the animals and the environment in our country. I'm very sure that those who work with him will take all the work forward to do even better now that Ian is gone. Our country has beautiful animals, beautiful environment, for tourism, for everything else that we keep them for. And that is the role that he played to ensure that nature is preserved, nature is honored, and we're all humble for all the good work that he did for our country. Today, we bid him farewell, and today we as South Africans are saying farewell to you, Ian. You have done your part.
Joe has asked me to do a couple of readings from Zululand, Wilderness, Shadow and Soul, that wonderful book. But I thought I'd like to say a few words first. I don't propose to speak for very long, for so much that is true and meaningful has already been said about the remarkable man whose life we are all here to celebrate today. What a life it was. A life filled with purpose and meaning, which was what gave it its distinction, and what has made us all feel so privileged to being able to play and share even a tiny part of it. I first met Ian many years ago, after he became a great friend of my father, having been moved to meet him after having read Venture to the Interior and Jung and the Story About Time. Books which he never failed to acknowledge at every opportunity had changed the course of his life and led him down paths he might not otherwise have followed. In South Africa, he took me, my husband, our 2 children, Emma and David, all of whom are here today, on a wilderness trail into the Umfolozi. And he took us, even though the week before he'd had one of the worst experiences of his life in the Umfolozi, when out on trail with Alistair Sparks, the editor of the Rand Daily Mail, and his 2 sons, he and Makubu had been forced to shoot some lions that had come for them. He knew that there was a wounded lioness out there, and he was extremely worried. But he took us because he'd promised. That was Ian. I've never forgotten the things he told us that day. He talked about the critical distance between us and a wild animal that we should always respect. If we came upon lion, we were to stand stock still and weren't to move so much as an eyelash. We were not to put even a toe into the waters of the Umfolozi. Generally, he managed to scare the living daylights out of us. But way and above and beyond that, he conveyed his deeper message that venturing into the wilderness was so much more than a physical adventure. It was a psychological one. It was, "I'm a religious man," said Ian, he once wrote, "and my religion is of the wilderness." And there in the Umfolozi with him, we saw what he believed in action. And we came away, having learned what most of you here will also know, that these places were almost sacred places, places that could provide psychological and spiritual nourishment, something which Ian believed was desperately needed in these modern times. But another thing I really want to talk about today is Ian's unparalleled gift for friendship. Once it was given, you were his friend for life, and his loyalty was yours forever. He felt an intense loyalty to my father, for Ian felt he had helped open up the rich inner world which was so important to him, the world of dreams, of Jungian thinking. They found they shared common values. They both had an extraordinary disdain for the common trivialities and material comforts of modern life. It wasn't a matter of inverted snobbery, it just simply didn't interest them. They, like T.S. Eliot, believed that modern material civilization was a form of living death. In his early years, it was then the Natal Parks Board he had, as he wrote, little in the way of possessions, and the pay was barely enough to feed and clothe us. But we were happy and fulfilled in the work we were doing. They were both too, my father and Ian, quite extraordinarily intuitive. On the very last visit that Ian paid to my father, many of you will know that my father lived in a very modern block just off the King's Road. As Ian left, as they said goodbye to each other, right up high in the sky in Chelsea, an hour flew by. They looked at each other. They knew what that meant. They would not see each other again. Between them, they helped fight many common battles, mostly in the realm of wilderness and conservation, and for what they believed was a desperate fight for man's spiritual salvation. After my father died, and we and many of my father's friends were deeply distressed by a book that denigrated and belittled every aspect of my father's life, that failed utterly to convey anything of his magic or his many great qualities. Ian's distress was as keen as my own. He was very angry, too. He became a profoundly important support for me, rigging me regularly, telling me of speeches where he unfailingly spoke out about the importance of my father's works and thinking. This he continued to do until the very last days. For this friendship and this loyalty, I shall always be profoundly grateful. But happily, for those of us who shared his way of looking at the world and care about the things he cared about, Ian has left us his books and writings. They convey, better than I ever could, the essence of the man. His straightforwardness, his doggedness, his courage, his sometimes surprising sensitivity, and his passionate belief in the values of friendship and loyalty. For my first passage from Zululand, Wilderness and Soul, I'd like to read a passage about Makubu and that great friendship that meant so much to both of them, the white man from the Transvaal and the Zulu from an old and noble tradition. They'd been walking in the hills. Makubu's knowledge of natural law seemed limitless, and almost everywhere everything had its praise name. I made page notes in my field notebooks, but it was impossible to keep up with Makubu's stream of stories, praise names, observations, and subtle actions that revealed some hidden aspect of the landscape. Makubu then went to lay a fire. He got on his knees, and within minutes had blown the embers into a flame. It caught quickly and burned with a bright red glow, with a good heat and a lovely scent. I lay back and mused how different and exciting and uplifting it was to have walked with Makubu. He knew he was acting, but it was a teaching process, and he knew that I wanted to learn from him on a different level from the other white men he had worked with. I had felt the spiritual qualities of the land and wanted to know more about it. My ecological scientific education was already in progress, thanks to my friends Jim Feely, Roddy Ward and Kim Tinley, but with Makubu, another form of education was evolving. What made him tick? He was planted firmly in the world of the old Zulu order, which had its impetus from the fierce discipline imposed by Shaka. He'd been brought up with respect for parents and his elders. Even as a man, he'd been given a beating by his father because the older man thought Makubu was being too harsh with one of the grandchildren. Makubu was able to accept life in the true philosophical sense. When I met him, he'd gone through the pain of losing children to enteritis, one wife to another illness, and relatives all around him had died. Death was ever present at his homestead. Drought wiped out his mealie in Mabila and decimated his cattle, and preying hyena fed constantly on his small herd of goats. There'd been times when they came right into the musi, went straight for the goat pen, and had to be fought off with not carrying a supply. Sometimes it was Tabiti, his chief wife, young children, who had to fend off the hyena, because Makubu was always working in the game reserves. The grain pit in the middle of the cattle enclosure was the mainstay of the musi, a tradition that was never broken, because it meant life or death to the people. I watched Makubu attaching the billy can to the sticks above the fire, and carefully placing the log so it gave off maximum heat. No movement was wasted, and his body was as supple as that of a man in his 20s. His skin shone, and his face was firm and strong. It was easy for me to fall into a hero-worshipping role, but I knew that although it was true to a degree, there were two aspects of the situation playing a part. One was the practical, following a man who knew and understood the bush better than anyone else I'd ever worked with. The other was his openness and complete lack of fear in talking about his culture, and his real willingness to pass it on to me. We had already established a rapport at an unconscious level, and I knew that it was going to grow. The interplay between us had many aspects, but above all, it was practical and on both sides. And then I thought I would like to read another passage that sums up something of the essence of that deep friendship between Makubu and Ian Clare, a remarkable friendship which is of course celebrated in this book. But I thought I would read another little bit, which was Ian's great belief in the importance of the campfire and the change and transformation that happened around it, something that everybody who's ever sat around a campfire will have recognised. Keeping watch at the fire was one ritual, wrote Ian. Not only was it important that someone kept an eye open for rhino or lion or two-bowed hyena, but there were religious reasons too. In my early days at St. John's College in Johannesburg, we kept watch in the crypt at Easter, and this was by far the most important experience I'd had in the Christian church. I was only 10 or 11 years old, but it gave me an opportunity for a glimpse inward and left a profound impression. I realised that there was another part of myself that was of an unknown world. Watching the flickering candles and the shadows dancing on the great stone walls brought a deep sense of inner peace. So despite the scorn of some ranger colleagues who thought keeping watch at the fire was not only unnecessary but was for sissies, I persisted. To this day, the fire watch continues, and there is no doubt that it served the two functions admirably. Nearly everyone who has participated in the Wilderness Leadership School trails has commented how the time spent alone at the fire was enriching. For many on their first watch, it was a terrifying time. There were lions, rhino, hippo, leopards, and other wild animals that under certain circumstances could be dangerous. Yet, it was fascinating to see that most trailers, desperately afraid as they might have been, stared into the fire, where there was no danger except from an emerging scorpion. This showed that it was the inner wild animals of which they were afraid. The danger lay at their backs and beyond the fire. By the time they'd done their third watch, fear had dissipated, and this was for many the beginning of an inward journey, a sense of being one with the world, a primordial experience and a connection with the ancient part of humanity that still lies within us all. I'd often lain in my sleeping bag, watching people sitting alone at the fire, their shoulders hunched and a faraway look in their eyes. A breaking branch or cough of a leopard might disturb them, but soon they would settle down and stare once more into the fire. The smell of wood smoke helped too to take them back into the evolutionary world. That, I think, conveys very well this almost religious sense that Ian always had when he was in the wilderness. And I just want to leave with some other words that always stay with me that Ian said, for I think this is a message for us for the future, when he said, conservation will never have its Waterloo, i.e. it will never have a definitive victory. It is a battle that will be going on forever.
By the market, darling, I remember the way. representing His Royal Highness, our first former lady of South Africa, our ambassador of South Africa, lords and ladies, friends, new and old. I think death brings a very strange thing. It brings good things and it brings bad things. The good things is that it unites people. We lose somebody, but we gain friendship again. We see faces we haven't seen for many years, and it's brought us together, and for that I'm extremely grateful. And I think Ian would celebrate that too. On Sunday, Ian Clare would have turned 88. It was his birthday, the 15th of March. If any of you recall, he was here for several years in a row, and we had a great knees up at the Cavalry and Guards Club when he turned 80. So we're just literally down the road from his stamping ground, or his stick stamping ground, as Ian could sometimes do. I'm very grateful and very proud to have representatives of the Wilderness Network here as well. We have Vance and Andrew, who head up Wilderness Global with me, who head up their own foundations in America and in South Africa alike. We've got Bob, who was previous chairman to the Wilderness Foundation, to the Wild Foundation, there was a slip, sorry Vance, the Wild Foundation in the USA. And we have many people who have loved and supported Ian over the years. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing to be together. And thank you for humouring us to have a memorial service here in London. We felt it was extremely important for those of you who couldn't venture to South Africa that we could actually celebrate his life here together in England, because he actually had a lot of fun here, usually thanks to Louise, who used to look after him very admirably for the periods of time he stayed with her. We also have Sheila Berry, who's from the Wilderness Leadership School. Thank you for being here too, Sheila. And Chris Blessington, who very admirably and very passionately and very well held the Wilderness Foundation together for many years and took it to new levels. It's proud to be with all of you. The list of people, however, who supported his work and vision is too long to include into this address, but they all have in common, in Ian's words, courage, discipline, loyalty, and commitments. I was reading something out of his book, Wilderness and the Human Spirit, the other day, and what was in there was this wonderful sense of values. Ian believed in values, and I think his values were what he sought in others: courage, discipline, loyalty, and commitment. For those of you who belong on that list and who are here today, you know who you are, and you're honoured for the contribution you make to wilderness, wildlife, and people. The wonderful Ian McCullum, Springbok rugby player, supporter of the Wilderness Leadership School, the Wilderness Foundation South Africa, did a eulogy in South Africa that was exemplary. And I feel almost kind of embarrassed that I'm going to borrow Ian's words, but I also think, why do we need to keep replicating? You know, one of the things Ian Blair used to say is that everybody goes off and plows their own bloomin' furrows, you know, why can't we all stick together? And so I'm not doing my own furrow, really. I'm sticking with Ian McCullum's furrow. Thank you very much, Ian, for your words. So part of this eulogy will be Ian's words, and part of it will be the small bits that I will add to that. I'm not a great reader of text. I'm a much more natural speaker, so forgive me if I stumble. I feel very emotional today. I feel very torn between celebration and loss. All these wonderful contradictory things that come to us in life. But I would like today to be a celebration of a great life. I think that there's a quote that haunts me, and it was in the recent Reese Witherspoon film called Wild, and the book that I've read before. And it was, what do you do, or what did you do with your one precious life? It's the kind of quote I think we should have on every fridge door that we wake up to every morning. What did you do with your one precious life? I think Ian filled his to the brim, and I'm sure you would all agree with me on that. Before I go on to Ian McCullum's words, I really wanted to give appreciation to Anne Clare. She was highly recognised in the South African Memorial Service, and I want to recognise her and the family again. It's not easy to look at the man who's adored by so many, whose time is pulled on by so many. And I think the family had a tough time in some ways because they had to share him with the world, and we really thank them for that. I think it took a lot of pain, a lot of forbearance at times, but also an immense amount of pride. We'll come to that again later in this speech. So who was the man? And this is now not my words, this is Ian McCullum's words. Ian Player passed away peacefully on Sunday the 30th of November 2014. He was 87 years of age. The birthdays of Winston Churchill and Mark Twain, and the death of Oscar Wilde. Thank you, Humphrey, for that beautiful quote. These coincidences in life would not have gone unnoticed by Ian, who looked for synchronicity, he looked for meaningful coincidence wherever he went. His final peaceful surrender at his home in the Carkloof Valley near Pietermaritzburg contrasted sharply with the way he lived his life, with the way he dealt with his ailing body and ultimately his own mortality. The Welsh poet Dylan Thomas would have been proud of him. He raged against the dying of the light, not simply his own dying, but against the toxic darkness of human indifference to the damage it is inflicting on nature. He did not go gentle into that good night. Ian was the founder of the Wilderness Leadership School, the Wilderness Foundations, Africa, the United Kingdom, the internationally acclaimed World Wilderness Congress that Vances admirably fought to keep going, a legacy that I hope our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will attend as well. He was the founder of the Natal Canoe Club, and in 1950 he initiated the world-famous Doozy Canoe Marathon, winning the epic 110-mile event on 3 occasions. As a game ranger for the Natal Parks at that time, in the early 1950s, inspired by previous park wardens Vaughan Kirby and H.P. Potter's efforts to protect the remaining white rhino in the Umfolozi, that last fragment of rhino-ness left on the planet, he and pilot Hendrik van Schoor conducted the first aerial count of the sole surviving group. The unforgettable number was 437. 437 left in the world. We are reaching those crises today as we speak, and as Andrew Muir very eloquently talked yesterday at Investec in London, we are reaching that tipping point now, where the numbers of rhino that are being born are being outstripped by the numbers of rhino being killed. We have a tragedy on our hands, and sometimes I wish and I'm grateful that Ian isn't there to see if we get it wrong and we are not able to lift ourselves up and beyond it. However, in 1960, as a senior warden, alarmed by what he described as the horrific poaching of these animals, he initiated and directed the famous Operation Rhino relocation program. The result was the successful placement of so many of the survivors to other national parks and sanctuaries throughout the world. In fact, if you go to Brooksnode Zoo in England, any rhino we see here in the zoos of Europe usually have Umfolozi blood in them. You can go and look at them when you're feeling homesick because they carry the genes of Africa. Without this initiative, it is almost certain that these creatures would have been classified as extinct today. Instead, his name is now synonymous with the President Lively, yet tragically threatened status of the species, as I said, and sadly, as I said, history is repeating itself. With the knowledge that we have, we're moving into this era, we need to pull together very hard as a team, as people who understand, as people who feel in their hearts and their souls how important this is. Let's not, as a gathering, let this importance slip. A fierce campaigner for the conservation and protection of wild areas not only in South Africa, but across the world. His long list of honours is testimony to his credibility as a human being. They included 2 honorary doctorates, the decoration for meritorious service from the Office of the President of the Republic of South Africa, a recipient of the Endangered Wildlife Trust Conservation Statesman of the Year Award. He was a Paul Harris Fellow, the Rotary Foundation International's highest award for furthering a better understanding of the friendly relations amongst peoples of the world. In 1981, he was honoured by the Prince of the Netherlands and admitted to the Order of Knight of the Golden Ark. This is not meagre. This is a very serious recognition of a very serious man who made a significant difference. His legacy, like many of the pioneering poets, writers and campaigners for the wild, will no doubt be in no doubt of his commitment and dedication to the conservation of wild areas. To this cause he was both driven and tireless, reminding us of those beautiful lines of the poem by Robert Frost, one I read as often as I can. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. He was a voice and a fighter for the natural inhabitants of the wild, for the grazers and the browsers, for the herds and the hunters, and the small. Not only for their sake, but for the sake of the human species as well. Who and what would we be without wild areas and animals in our lives? Deeply interested in the psychological significance of wilderness, this is what set him apart from the other conservationists. It is an aspect of this deep and determined man that not too many people knew of. Influenced by the writings and psychological perspectives of the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, as well as that of Lawrence von der Post, and for whom he was a great advocate, as Lucia very aptly and very eloquently said. He warmed to the significance of the symbolic life. It was Van der Post's book, as Lucia mentioned, Venture to the Interior, that changed and shaped his attitude as a young ranger. In his own words, after reading the book, I trod the earth differently. He saw the wilderness differently. He began to see wild animals and wild places, not only for what they are, but for what they represent in the human psyche. If an animal becomes extinct in his thinking, then the human psyche suffers. If a wild species dies, then something in the psyche dies as well. Put differently, he understood the deep reciprocity of nature. I think nature, personally, is a lot more generous than we are. The fight for the natural environment could be understood as the fight for human sanity. Deep down, he knew it, and so do we. Ian held a conviction of the presence of God in nature. It is in this regard that he echoes the persuasions of John Muir, who said the best place to discover the true attributes of deity was in nature. If Muir was committed to immersing in mountain baptism everyone he could, then Ian Clare was a kindred spirit, committed to exposing as many as possible to the significant healing of wilderness. It's a legacy we try to take into every step of our work here in the United Kingdom. If in conservation Africa's wildlife was to make any sense to the general public, he was convinced the best way to do that was to give a direct experience of wilderness. Ahead of his time, he believed that environmental issues would inevitably become leadership issues. I look to the leaders in our midst. It is so true. It was on this premise that he founded the Wilderness Leadership School, of which many of us have been fortunate enough to walk its trails and sit under the stars. 50 years on, more than 40,000 young men and women of all ages and cultures have been on trail. For many of these, the trails were life-changing. The wilderness, in effect, was a sacred place, a church without dogma, an inner and an outer journey, a space in which, if you were open to it, you could hear that still, small voice of God. However, it was not without structure. And Ian instilled a discipline that remains today in every trail we take and every trail we go on. We did not wear our watches. We still don't. We have four days minimum in the wild. I have a collection of Robert Johnson's writing, which Ian used to always tell me to buy. He, she, we, the psychology of romantic love, etc. Robert Johnson said that 4 days, you needed 4 days, because that was enough to shake off your Western psyche. Without them, without the watch, without these 4 days, you learn to pay attention to nature's timekeepers. The sunrise, the sunset, the changing position of the stars, and not least the diurnal variations of animals and birds. The rituals were simple and profoundly meaningful. Walking in silence, storytelling around the fire, the night watch, that experience of fear, that reconnection to your senses, the reconnection to your humanity in a wild space. Ian spent time with us here in the UK and mainly in Scotland. With Annie Norrie's help, we bounced over rough tracks in Sutherland on the Duke of Westminster's land, seeking places to journey, seeking to take that African experience into a context here in Britain, where there was really no wilderness, just wild space. Ian Burney, who's here, helped us as well in those early days. How did we journey into the wilds of Scotland and carry that same magnitude of experience that we had in Africa? With difficulty. But we've extended our work now to cover vast tracts of Scotland, carrying all those messages with us, doing all those rituals, and it does make a significant difference to people's lives. Ian loved London, he loved ceremony, and the sheer contrast of it brought his life of the wild into London. But he seemed just as comfortable in Piccadilly banging his stick as he did sitting around a campfire. He was able to adapt like a chameleon to both, merging in colour, but never quite in soul. He was the strategist, seeking solutions, seeking money, seeking ways to further the value of the wild and his beloved wilderness school, his beloved foundations, the Congress and the Ntombela Foundation. He never stopped. He was tireless in his campaigning for the rhino. He was tireless in his campaigning for wilderness. He left a legacy far from his home that we here proudly continue to grow and expand. For me, the work is the easy part. The ceremony is embedded in our heart and practice of all we do here. But I think the thing that I really want to commit to, Ian, is that we will continue to protect the spiritual dimension of our work. I think we can become so in our heads and lose our hearts. The Wilderness Foundation UK sat at a board meeting and we were determined that the word spiritual would remain in our work. We are not going to lose it. No matter how much we get practical and pragmatic and strategic, it has to lie at the heart of what we do. And the loss of that spirit will be a loss of our humanity. And the loss of our humanity will be the loss of our values. And the loss of our values will be the loss of life. It is fundamental. Ian McCallum wrote a final poem, which is probably one of his most powerful poems ever written, and very hard for me to do it in the way that he would, but I will give it a go. Have we forgotten that wilderness is not a place, but a pattern of soul, where every tree, every bird and beast is a soul maker? Have we forgotten that wilderness is not a place, but a moving feast of stars, scales, footprints and beginnings? Since when did we become afraid of the night? And that only the bright stars count, or that the moon is not a moon unless it is full? By whose command were the animals, through groping fingers, one for each hand, reduced to big and little 5? Have we forgotten that every creature is within us, carried by tides of earthly blood that we named and that we named them? Have we forgotten that wilderness is not a place, but a season, and that we are in its final hour? A man of books, courage, discipline, tenacity, fascination, with all the human condition and frailty that came with that, you are missed and celebrated together, Ian Clare of us all. My final words carry the contradiction of life and death. It's with great sadness that I let you know that unfortunately Ian's oldest son died this morning. Kenneth Clare was to be with us today. I've been very, very blessed to have had some very, very special conversations with Kenneth as we planned this memorial together. And it was a very big shock this morning to hear the news that he had passed. He has been extremely ill, suffering from stomach cancer, and very much suffering. But it was a very poignant moment that he died today. But I think, as Humphrey Wakefield, in his wisdom as our patron and friend, said to me, let's not make this sad. Let's make this an opportunity, in the distance between Ian and his son, of the miles between them, of living in England and the Africa that he loved, that they're together, actually. And that's the joy that we need to be looking at. That finally, I think Kenneth's suffering has ended, and that Ian, on the day when we're remembering him today, and I'm sure he's looking at us and banging his stick somewhere, I think that they are together. And I'm sorry to pass that message to you, but it was Anne's wishes that this was announced at the memorial service this afternoon. It was very, very sad to hear, but I'm very happy that they are together. Thank you.
So that's a shock, because I knew Kenneth and I didn't know that he passed away. The consolation is that I have 2 rhinos in Dorset. One was given to me by Kenneth and one was given to me by Ian, and I've kept them both by my desk together, facing each other. Also by my desk I have a very happy framing of Ian when he came down to Dorset on his 80th to go to T.E. Lawrence's cottage. He was a great fan of T.E. Lawrence's, so that little tribute will stay there, and bless you, Kenneth, wherever you are. And also, thank you, Joe, for inviting me to speak, and all the incredible, I can't see with my glasses on, but just pretty hard to speak after all the things you've said, and so much has been said already. But it is a great honour for me to be able to speak here as Ian's good friend, and so I thank you for bearing with me. My first thoughts are with Anne and Ian's family. We must celebrate Ian's life, and I must also think of Kenneth now as well. And I feel very lucky to be able to contribute further the fact that I can speak about Kenneth as well. That's also good too. We're honouring a remarkable man of legendary status who became a close family friend through staying at our home in London. I first met Ian Clare in South Africa through John and Sally Aspinall, and Sally is here today. My father-in-law was also a passionate and notable conservationist. He relished Ian's company and greatly admired his relentless work as an activist and protector of rhinos in wild places. The 2 men were very different, but there was a soul connection with their love for wildlife and the reverence for the natural world. I've been privileged to stand on the shoulders of 2 great visionaries as I've experienced the wilder parts of Africa. One of the great joys of knowing Ian was becoming involved with his inner circle of dedicated wilderness friends and educators. I did this through working with Joe and the Wilderness Foundation UK and attending World Wilderness Congresses in South Africa and Alaska. These congresses, founded by Ian and run by Vance Martin, provided a haven for anyone prepared to think dynamically and creatively about conservation issues. However, the most profound and important experience for me, which made sense of Ian's wilderness philosophy, was going on trail at the Wilderness Leadership School in the beautiful Umfolozi Reserve in KwaZulu-Natal. Later, it was a great source of pride when Clary, my daughter, experienced the Drakensberg, Lake St. Lucia and Umfolozi with the Wilderness Leadership School. Not a comfortable journey in many ways, but she has never sounded better than when she returned with silt in her shoes and stories from the wilderness to tell. Initiated by the Wilderness Foundation UK, components of these trails have been successfully transported to the wildest parts of Scotland. They are now flourishing through the Imbewu programme created by Jo Roberts and her team. Rituals have always been important to Ian, and these are reflected within the trails. Participants must take off their watches to experience time in a new way. Further, there are moments of silence, so trailers can listen to nature and their inner selves. Imbewu in Zulu means seed, and the fact that Ian's visionary ideas for deep wilderness experiences have taken root amongst the rocks and heather in the Highlands made him very happy indeed. I was fortunate enough to be involved in the early pilot trails, and I will never forget the ruggedness of the mountains or the sight of otters swimming across the loch in the early morning mist. When Ian arrived at our front door in London, he was the distilled essence of a man that evolved mentally and physically from African soil. Stick in hand and half-empty suitcase, he believed in travelling light. Books, dream diaries, and only basic essentials. Such books included Van der Post, Jung, or other books that might lead him to a deeper understanding of the human psyche. However, what Ian used most effectively was stored in his head. He was not here on holiday.
but to give speeches and attend meetings. Some of you here have heard Ian's speeches on several occasions. You can remember their power because they told great truths about human nature and our spiritual need for the natural environment. These speeches stirred people's deepest emotions. Although on many occasions he was speaking to the converted, he gave great strength to others, often isolated groups and individuals fighting to protect endangered wildlife or threatened wilderness areas in their corner of the world. While Ian was not exactly on holiday in Britain, he loved to see his eclectic group of friends, and whether it was a Royal Geographical Society lecture, a trustees' board meeting, or watching footprints in the wilderness on the barge, one could always expect a special insight from Ian. When moved to do so, he would bang his stick on the ground to rally attention and articulate what was important and what was being missed. Ian addressed both the sacred and the profane. He was extraordinarily perceptive, and if anything failed to conform to his ideals and high standards, there would be trouble. Perhaps that is partly why he commanded so much respect and admiration from so many people, because they could trust his judgment. He could be as tough as old boots, yet there was a compassionate and spiritual side to Ian that could see and understand the world more deeply than most. This understanding recognised his friend in the Zulu game guard Mkubu Ntumbela as the remarkable philosopher, naturalist and historian that he was. Ian simply knew what was good and shared his vision with the world. He fought tooth and claw for what he believed in until his dying days. Thank you, Ian, for the richness and meaning you added to our lives. I think I speak for many when I say we will not forget your words of wisdom and the light that you shed in this world. Furthermore, we will miss your loyal company.
We stand to sing together the hymn, Lord of all hopefulness.
Lord When I was 18, I had the privilege of going off to South Africa and to going on one of the wilderness trails that have been spoken about previously. Some of the previous talks have rattled up a flood of memories around being around the campfire. Some of my strongest memories of that experience were in the Umfolozi and in Isimangaliso Wetland Park, where I saw the white rhino and many other wonderful animals there. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if it wasn't for the work of Ian Player and others like him. It was an incredibly spiritual experience, and that word I think is powerful. A deep connection to the wilderness that many of us across generations don't get to experience, and having that privilege, it was an amazing thing. Ian, as I said, played a pivotal role in the conservation of those areas, as well as many others, and he worked with others across the wilderness movement to ensure that this was an issue of concern for many generations, hopefully to come. And when I was out there, I found my own passion for the wilderness. In many ways, I suppose, similar to how he would have found his, being outdoors, being active, seeing the wonderful things that a beautiful country like South Africa has to offer. And I've taken this experience into working with the Wilderness Foundation in the UK, trying to get outdoors as much as possible. But we can't take that work for granted, the work that Ian Player and others like him have done. It's taken blood, sweat and tears by many to get that done, and that is not over. For generations to come, if we want to experience these wild places, there is a lot of work that we need to do, and as you said earlier, it's an ongoing battle, it's not going to stop. But I don't think we should take that as a point of concern, but a point of hope, as there are many people gathered here today, and many across the world, who are inspired by the actions of Ian Player, and do want to contribute to preserving wild areas, animals and biodiversity, and to try and find that spiritual connection with the wilderness. He often sent a powerful message. I've been watching over, using a new medium, YouTube, watching many videos, talks that he gave, and in many of them there's a consistent message around the role that youth will play in the future of preserving these wild places and continuing the battle. And I think Ian Player has inspired many young people to pick up the baton and continue the fight. And it's wonderful to see the impact that he's had on many young people through the Wilderness Foundation, the Wilderness Leadership School, and other organisations that he has touched and founded throughout the world. This message goes across geographies, across languages and across cultures, and I think it's something that is incredibly powerful. And when I walk away from here today, I'm going to be reinvigorated hearing the wonderful stories about Ian's life and his legacy, to pass that message on, to get it out there and to speak to people all across the world, wherever I come into contact with people, and to say to young people there is such a role for them to play in moving forward, and how important this battle is. I proudly count myself as one of those who have been inspired by the work of Ian Player, and I'm here today to say thank you. So thank you, Ian.
My name is Cheyenne, and I was a participant in the Wilderness Foundation's turnaround programme. I've rock climbed and snowshoed in the Pyrenees and sea kite in marine wilderness in Norway. These wilderness journeys have changed my life thanks to the legacy of Dr. Ian Player, and inspired me to write this poem. In a life full of doubt and bad memories, there's new doors to unlock as we search for the keys. New outlook on life, new opportunities, another time to explore and sail across the seas. From climbing mountains to sailing a boat, our heads above water trying to stay afloat. Kayaking through the winds of the open air at sea, trying to reach a side to be the best that we can be. Reaching breaking point halfway in the snow. The only way is up, there's no other way to go. Accepting others for who they are and letting them shine as bright as a star. Finding ourselves through hard work and fun. This is our journey, but it's only just begun. Thank you.
One small point of order, just you may or may not be aware of, but everybody is invited back to the Cavalry Guards Club at 127 Piccadilly for tea after the service. This prayer was a great favourite of Ian's and was read at his memorial service in his beloved South Africa. Would you join me, please, in reading the first line of each verse? A prayer for healing. We join with the earth and with each other to bring new life to the land, to restore the waters, to refresh the air. We join with the earth and with each other to renew the forests, to care for the plants, to protect the creatures. We join with the earth and with each other to celebrate the seas, to rejoice in the sunlight, to sing the song of the stars. We join with the earth and with each other to recreate the human community, to promote justice and peace, to remember our children. We join with the earth and with each other. We join together as many and diverse expressions of one loving mystery for the healing of the earth and the renewal of all life.
A collection will be taken during the next hymn. Would you please stand to sing Morning Has Broken?
Thank
prayers. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born into eternal life. Every part of the earth is sacred. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the children of the earth. The air is precious, for all of us share the same breath. This we know, the earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. This we know, all things are connected, like the blood which unites one family. Our God is the same God, whose compassion is equal for all. For we did not weave the web of life. We are merely a strand in it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. In honour of Ian and in gratitude for this planet of life, we commit ourselves to do all we can to uphold and preserve life in all its diversity. And may God bless you, today and forever. Amen. We keep silence together as we give thanks for Ian and today also for Kenneth.